But first thing, Gary, we're going to get to Tony right out of the gate. Tony's predicting a stronger dollar. He's going to tell us all about that. Thing number one of this week's show, Gary, Tony Nash on dollar resilience and central bank policies. Gary, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Tony, so glad you were able to join us this week. So, one of the things that has been a key part of deep knowledge investing and the five things we talk about it all the time is the debasement of the dollar. And when we talk about that, we are talking about the loss of purchasing power of the dollar. However much money, however many dollars you have in your checking account, if you want to go buy food, fuel, entertainment, whatever you're buying, you're going to get less for your money.
Mhm.
Now, you are correctly pointing out that's one way to view the dollar. The other way is relative to other currencies. And in that sense, the dollar's been really strong. You've got views on what you think is going to happen to the dollar against some big currencies over the next few months or the next few years. What's the time frame you're looking at here, and what do you see happening?
Well, really, it's this piece was really written about the next few months, and part of the reason I wrote it was because we had people out there saying the dollar is going to rip to 110 or 115 on the Dixie, something like that, and we don't necessarily subscribe to that. So, just really quickly, Complete Intelligence is an AI-driven platform. We forecast 1,800 items every week, brand new forecasts every Monday morning. And so what we're looking for in the dollar over the next quarter, I would say, is moderate appreciation, really within a band, right? And so when we look at the dollar, I think a lot of the run up, we've gone from 100 to about 106 on the Dixie over the last 2 months. So we've seen really dramatic appreciation in the US dollar. And so you have to compare that when we compare it to places like Europe with the euro or Japan. Japan has a central bank that really has, over the last couple of years, kind of talked out of both sides of its mouth. At times, it's rapid depreciation of the currency. At times, they want to strengthen it, and you've seen these hugely volatile moves in the JPY. So when we look at the Japanese yen, there were statements out today by the BOJ saying that they want to have better communication, and that may lead to appreciation in the yen, which won't happen. Okay, why won't it happen? Well, partly because China is trying to devalue the Chinese yuan, and Japan has to be competitive with China on an export basis. So Japan is not going to appreciate their currency. Compared to the dollar, both of these are compared to the dollar. Why? Because the US is the biggest export market. Okay, so Japan has, and China as well, they have central banks that are not really very good at communicating with public markets. So you can't really take their statements as entirely credible. It takes intervention in Japan's case from the finance ministry, typically to intervene in markets to make their message well known. Okay, if we look on the other side of the world in Europe, we have a Europe where German industrial capacity is collapsing. We have a French government that just collapsed. We have a UK government that doesn't have a lot of credibility. And so Europe generally has massive problems. And the ECB came out and said they're going to cut rates by 25 basis points at their next meeting. So you don't have a lot of strength in the Eurozone. And I know I mentioned the UK. I know it's not in the Eurozone, but it is relevant to the EU. You don't have a lot of strength in the Eurozone politically, economically, and that's problematic. So again, going back to this piece, there was this Trump trade, or is this Trump trade that's been on, where people really bet on appreciation of the dollar based upon Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, and other things, strengthening the dollar, cutting down US spending. I think a lot of that's gotten ahead of itself. It's going to be harder than many people think, I believe, for Doge to make an impact. And that's what our models are telling us as well. So the strength of the dollar, there's been a lot of enthusiasm there, but we don't necessarily see it going up to, say, 110 or 115. We also don't see it going down to, say, 95 or 90 in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. We think it's in a pretty solid zone of, say, 103 to 109, something like that.
All right. So for the people who are new to this, what Tony's talking about, where he's talking about going down to 103 or 95 or at 106, could go up to 110. and he's referred to that as Dixie. What that is the US dollar index. The ticker is DXY, which is why people call it Dixie. And what it is it is a measure of the US dollar versus other large currencies. So against things like the euro or the British pound or the Japanese yen. And so when Tony's giving those numbers or talking about Dixie, that's what he's referring to. A higher number would mean a stronger dollar. And again, it's important to clarify that that's a stronger dollar versus other fiat currencies, the kinds of currencies that we're talking about here. It does not mean that your grocery bill is going to go down. We could have a strong dollar against the yen or against the euro and weakening in terms of your purchasing power. Now, Tony, the question I want to ask you, because we've been talking about the Bank of Japan here for over 2 years. Deep Knowledge Investing started talking about the issues with the carry trade and the Japanese currency back in October of 22. That's when we first started on that. And you're right. The Bank of Japan at times have spoken out of both sides of their mouth. We've also criticized them for being too clear in situations where a little ambiguity would have kept their currency a bit stronger. But you're forecasting the dollar to strengthen against the yen over the next few months. Now, my question for you is, given how weak the yen has been over the last 2 years, there's always the possibility, and with inflation starting to spike there, that the Bank of Japan, they've talked about raising rates. They sort of did earlier this year. They did a little bit. They've raised the reference rate. What happens to your forecast if the Bank of Japan raises by something small, like 20 basis points, which for them would be a small move, and they'd still be way below where the ECB is, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the US Federal Reserve, way above them, way below Canada. What happens if the Bank of Japan makes a move?
Not a lot, to be honest. I think a lot of those expectations of a small move by BOJ are a little bit assumed. Japan cannot strengthen much for productivity, international competition, demographic, and other reasons. They are painted into a corner. And all of this started in 2012. The Japanese yen in 2012 was trading about 76 to the dollar. And now it's trading at like 154. So people talk about dollar debasement. Imagine living in Japan and seeing your yen, more than be cut in more than half over a decade, right?
And by the way, that's an even bigger problem in Japan because they are energy poor.
Yep.
And have to import energy, which is typically priced in US dollars. So,
Right.
we've complained when the price of fuel has gone up here. Now imagine your currency being cut in half against the dollar. And, we'd effectively here, we'd be looking at like $8 to $10 per gallon gasoline.
Yes. And I live in Texas where it's 225 or something. So
yeah,
it's, people here would be really upset about that. So Japan
there'd be riots and people would be voted out of office very quickly at prices like that.
Sure, yeah. So Japan is in a tough place. They don't have a lot of room, especially with a China that is having to be extraordinarily price competitive for exports. And so China will have, and I don't want to get too much into the tariff thing, we can come back to that at some point, but they have subsidized US tariffs in previous years. They continue to subsidize that. So they will continue to be price competitive on exports, which will force Japan to depreciate the yen maybe further. Maybe they're in the zone. It's, within 5 or 10 points, they're kind of in the zone.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting issue to see what the Japanese people think if the Bank of Japan further weakens the yen. Regarding Chinese stimulus, I'm liking it for selfish reasons. We have a huge position in Las Vegas Sands. So if they want to spray liquidity into the system there and have people go to Macau and hit the gaming tables, we're all for it. That works for us. So we'll make money from bad policy around here.
Sure. Yeah. I saw the announcement in China today. I've been in and around China for 20 years. I won't believe it until I see it. I mean, I think it's great for headlines. I don't trust it until I see money hit people's hands.
Fair enough. That's always a great point, Tony. Whenever it comes to central banks and government policy, we're skeptical too. So glad you were able to join us today. For people who are interested in your 1,800 different continuous forecasts, how do they find you?
We're at completeintel.com, and that's just a monthly recurring, no long-term commitments, $25 a month, and you get our forecast fresh every Monday morning. So thanks, Gary. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, Tony, great seeing you. Thanks for joining us,
Thank you.
and we'll look forward to speaking with you sometime soon.